channel. My name is Brian Beebe. I am a high school math teacher, and today we are talking about systems. I wanted to explain more about systems and talk about something new that I have for you. It is free. It is a checklist for systems for secondary teachers. So it just lists all the systems that you should have in place. I'm saying should with air quotes because we all have different circumstances that we're teaching under, and we may need different systems that are not listed, and some systems that are listed on there may not apply to us, but that's okay. It's at least a good jumping off point for you if you're wondering where you should start with systems. So that is linked in the description box. So full disclosure here, I am filming this as I head back to school, but this will not be up on YouTube until December, and it's just part of being on maternity leave for right now. So even though it's December, I know that it might seem kind of late. I mean, maybe you're watching this during back to school the following year. That's totally fine because videos on YouTube, they just live forever. But if you are watching this when it goes live in December, this is a good time to do like a systems check-in to make sure that your systems are running smoothly. And if they're not, we can kind of look at maybe systems that you didn't quite plan out that you need to put in place, or systems that maybe just need to be tweaked a little bit. So on the checklist, you will find that there are 4 categories of systems. There's systems for organization. I do have videos related to that. I will link them below. We have systems for grading, and that's just to help you streamline your grading. I don't have anything about grading systems on YouTube, and I won't. They are something that I talk about in my course. So what I do have on YouTube though is tips for grading to help you like streamline it and make it go a little bit faster. We also have systems for classroom management, and then systems to teach students. So when we talk about systems for classroom management and to teach students, we start talking a little bit more about what you would call a procedure. And it's still a type of system, but it's just, we're more commonly calling them procedures instead. So you might hear me use those words interchangeably. The differences are very subtle. When we plan it out, we're talking about systems, but we're going to have procedures set in place for our students to follow. Students, they kind of don't really understand like what it means by system, which is okay. So when we are talking about setting up your classroom systems and procedures to make them effective, they have 2 components. One is that they are planned in advance, and the other is that they are adjusted as needed. These are things you want to plan. It's like what they always say about classroom management, which systems play into as well. But if you don't have a classroom management plan, your students are going to have a plan for you. And if you don't plan for these systems and procedures ahead of time, things are just going to happen on their own without you really having any control over it. And this is an area where you could very easily have control. We're talking about controlling little things. You can't control everything. I learned that the hard way. It's just not how it goes, especially with children, but there are some things that we can influence, let's say. Maybe control is too strong of a word. And going back to that second part, we can always change and adjust our classroom systems and procedures anytime. You reserve the right to do that as the teacher. So don't get hung up on, I don't want to make changes for my students. I don't want to confuse them. They're students. They will learn. Like, they are smart. Their brains are malleable. We can make changes mid-year. We can make changes at the end of the year. You get to make changes whenever you want to. Your students will adjust, especially if it's an improvement. If it's something that's going to make things easier on them or better for them, they're going to be all about it. So don't be afraid to make changes. So when it comes to teaching procedures, we definitely want to do this at the beginning of the school year, but usually around the middle, students kind of start to fall out of our setup routines and procedures. So it's always a good time to reteach them. Usually it's just the excitement of the holidays will get them, or when we come back from break, whether it's winter break or spring break, they sometimes need reminders about where they are and what to do. So you might be teaching procedures at different points throughout the year. It's totally normal. You didn't do anything wrong. Your students haven't done anything wrong. They're just being kids. But whenever you go to teach a procedure, you want to plan exactly what the procedure is. Think about when it makes sense to teach them that procedure, and think about how you want to teach them the procedure. So one example that I thought of that's kind of different or outside the box is when we take tests. So I'm not on the first day of school teaching them like, this is what we're gonna do when we go to take a test, because they don't need to know that yet. I wait until we get closer to a test, and one way that I actually like to really teach them is to give them a practice test. So I give them a test that's basically like the first unit test, but it's not the first unit test. So it's just for practice, just so that we can actually practice the procedure so that they can see what a test looks like in my classroom and understand what to do and all that good stuff. And when I say what a test looks like, I mean just so that they can get used to the format of how I format my tests. I actually do like a mock Regents exam format, because that's what we take at the end of the year. So they get an idea of what tests are gonna look like in my classroom, how to complete them. You know, little things like they have to write the answer choice on the line if it's multiple choice so I can grade it. Little things like that. So we're learning that stuff during a practice test rather than during a real test. So I'm not going to list every procedure that you need to teach, because we got the checklist for that you can download. The link is still going to be in the description box. But here are some other procedures that you may want to teach at the beginning of the year and then reinforce throughout the year. The big ones are entering and exiting the classroom, how to do that, where they should go, what they should do, where they should stand, if they should stand. You want to think through all these things. Ideally, in your mind, if you had that dream student walk in your room and know exactly what to do, what would they be doing? List those steps out and teach that to your students. Same thing for exiting the classroom. I don't know about you all, but my biggest pet peeve is when students all stand at the door, because I'm only 5'2" and my students are way taller than me usually, and so I can't see what's going on. So I need them like at their seats until I tell them, you know, stay seated until the bell rings. Or I'm kind of okay with them standing by their desks because I can still see them because they're spaced out enough. But when they're all jumbled up at the door, I start to panic a little bit, because I'm like, oh my gosh, something could happen. And my students in my school are really good, so nothing ever does, but it's still. Our other procedures to teach are when and how to request a bathroom pass, when and how to gather or return supplies, or are you going to be passing them out? How do you want that to happen? We also have how they are going to turn in work. So think of any of the procedures that are happening regularly in your class, whether they're daily or weekly, anything that's going to happen repeatedly. Teach your students how you want it done. And lastly, let's talk about how to manage these systems and procedures as far as students are concerned. So the first thing that you want to do is communicate them, which we just talked about. You want to teach them. So get a good, clear picture of what you want your students to do. That way it's going to be so much easier to teach them how to do it right. The second tip for managing procedures I mentioned briefly earlier, make it easy for them. So for example, I had to switch up my procedure for students returning supplies. I do interactive notebooks. There's a lot of supplies involved there. We have the scissors, the glue, sometimes highlighters, colored pencils, the works. So I had all of the supplies housed in their own little bins on a back table in my classroom. So students would have to get up, go to the back table to put their stuff away, go back to their seats, and then they're like waiting for the bell to ring before they can go. And that ended up being a huge mess because, you know, some students are more responsible than others. Some of them would make sure that the glue went back just right. Some of them would just kind of throw the glue in there and, you know, it tips over and it spills and it's just a horrible mess that I get to deal with. So that procedure totally flopped. It was really out of the way for students to go all the way to the back of the classroom. It wasn't someplace where they would naturally go. So we switched up that system. I bought an 8-cube organizer from Target. I put it sideways by my door, so that way students were passing the supplies as they walked in. So that way as they walked by, they could just grab what they needed and go to their seats. And since my students were in tables, instead of having every student responsible for their individual set of supplies, I divided the supplies into caddies. The caddies made it so much easier because first of all the supplies are in this one bin with a handle. It's amazing. The caddies were divided so there are clear spaces for the different supplies to go. And rather than having, you know, 24 or more different students getting up and down to get supplies and put them away, it was only 6 students because I had 6 tables. So that was much easier to work with. Students were more inclined to clean up after themselves. I didn't have nearly as many like bottles and other things just left out on desks at the end of class. And a big part of that is also because they were sitting together in tables. So if a student forgot to put their supplies away, which, you know, happens, there's a lot going on in a class, their table mates would say to them, oh, hey, make sure you put the glue in there. Or sometimes they notice that the kid forgot, walked away or something, and they just put it away for them. So big, big game changer. Love, 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 love my table caddies. And our final tip for managing your procedures is to enforce it consistently. So when you have your students doing something, like let's say we stick with the example of putting supplies away, you have to enforce them actually doing that. Otherwise, when you don't, and you notice that they left stuff out and you don't say anything to them, they take it as a cue that you don't really mean it and that they can just leave their stuff there and it's okay. They kind of learn based on what you enforce or don't. So make sure you enforce whatever procedure it is consistently. And one way to do that is to go back and reteach the procedure like we discussed previously. So if my students left the classroom a mess and didn't put their supplies away, I would take a picture of what that looked like and show them the next day and say, this is not okay. We need to make sure that we are doing X, Y, and Z every single day. And I mean, it depends on your students. That one student was like my accelerated 9th graders. They did not do that again after we went through that whole thing. I know that's not the same for everyone, but find what works for your students in your school. So that is all of the advice that I have on systems for today. Make sure you grab the checklist for systems that you want to set up for your classroom. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching.